Hello, it's Sunday the 10th of May. Please find Romans 8 verses 14 and 15, page 1135. We were looking forward to Bring and Share VE Day Lunch, weren't we, today? Maybe you can smell cooking wafting through. Well, the aroma wafting through, not the cooking. I hope you enjoyed the virtual VE Day celebrations on Friday. Well, now we're going to hear from God. Romans 8 verses 14 and 15. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. Author Timothy Jones tells the story of taking his adopted daughter to Disney World. For years, she was denied going by her original adoptive parents. When she finally experienced Disney's Magic Kingdom, here was her response. Daddy, I finally got to go to Disney World. But it wasn't because I was good, it's because I'm yours. Christian is a child of God. Verse 14 then, a stunning status stated, sons. Though all people are God's offspring, Acts 17, only those who are led by the Spirit of God are his sons, children. Led here in verse 14 does not mean a warm feeling. The Lord is leading me. People talk about that I should move house or church. Led here is not about moving house, but about morality. Led means directed and controlled by the Spirit, his gentle, dominating influence. People led by the Spirit are described in 4 through 11, in the Spirit, indwelled by the Spirit. People led by the Spirit are doing the duty of 12 and 13, killing sin by the Spirit. And it's only these people, verse 14, who are Christians, only these who this verse refers to. I know in COVID we all want to be united as a nation, don't we? Nation together, and that's nice and there's some good in it. But those led by the Spirit, Christians, are utterly different to everyone else. That is why at times we must feel left out. And I cannot be a child of God if I am not at war with my sins. If I am not doing, verse 13, killing my sin, then I am not, verse 14, a son of God. This will never be perfect flawlessness, but it will always be persisting fighting against my sins. If you feel the battle against sins, verse 13, then that's a wonderful sign that you are led by the Spirit. You're a child of God, verse 14. For those who are led by the Spirit of God, are the children of God. Christians, male or female, are called 3 times children, teknon, of God. Verse 16, 17 and 21. Christians, males and females, are 3 times called sons, huioi, of God. 14, 15 and 19. The NIV puts children in verse 14 instead of sons. Now the NIV translators are godly, they are cleverer than me and cleverer than you. And the NIV is the best translation today, in my humble opinion, but it is not infallible. I get why they translate sons as children in verse 14, but I'll explain why humbly I suggest it's best left as sons. I want us to remember that God is incredibly non-sexist. You see, in those days in Rome, daughters were not treated equally to sons. Micah had a higher status than Isabel or Olivia. Sons was the higher status. So for Paul to say in verse 14 that female Christians were sons of God was utterly stunning. Females called sons of God. Radical equality. Don't let anyone tell you that biblical Christianity is sexist. It's a stunner. For anyone, for males or females, for you and me, sitting in our sitting room or dining room, You are like Jesus. You are a son of God. Now, heresy alarm, you are not a little God. But let's know this. This word son, huioi, is used of Jesus, the first few verses of Romans, his son and the Son of God in 1:3 and 4. In 1:9, Paul preached the gospel of God's Son. This gospel makes us sons. In 8:3, God sent his own Son. In 8:29, God's final purpose is for us to be conformed to the image of his sons. We are not the Son. We are not little gods. But this is a stunning status. As adopted sons, we can enjoy the same favour with the Father. As adopted sons, we enjoy the same status as the Son, the same favour. That Jesus, the Son, has with the Father, that is what I enjoy in the Son. So what's a Christian? The richest answer I know is a Christian is someone who has God for his Father, who is a son of God, Packer writes. Do you suffer from identity amnesia? Identity amnesia is forgetting who you are. You may well know the story of Mrs. Thatcher. Mrs. Thatcher was visiting a care home and she asked a resident, "Do you know who I am?" "No," replied the confused resident, "but if you ask matron, she'll tell you." Paul wants to cure us of spiritual identity amnesia. Whenever I feel unloved, I've forgotten that I'm a son of the Heavenly Father. He loves me. When I feel insecure or fearful, I've forgotten that I'm a son of the living God, that he's for me. So our stunning status, male and female, is we are sons of God, adopted. Verse 15, our stunning status described the first benefit of being a son of God. We've moved in 15 from slaves to sons, from fear to freedom, and it is the Spirit's work. And there's a beautiful symmetry about this verse. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. The Spirit's work, he is the Spirit of adoption. Adoption is a great thing. Just imagine the Queen phones up the Smiths. I'd like to adopt Micah, the Queen says. Imagine how privileged Micah would feel. The Queen wants me. But Micah has a loving family, so he'd probably say no. But imagine an orphan. And we have watched many turn-of-the-century US cheesy films. There's a series called Love Comes Softly. And in one of those films, the orphan train is going through the West, and the orphan train would stop at each town. The orphans would get out and they would line up in the town hall, and they would be chosen out of a line. It's very heartwarming, but also heartbreaking, as some of the children, the orphans, are not chosen. Perhaps the teenager orphans were not chosen, or the awkward ones, or the ugly ones. Remember, child of God, you and I, we're adopted children of God. It can change your life thinking that. Adoption for Paul means two things to two audiences. To the Jewish world, Israel was the adopted son of God. In 9:4, Paul reads, the people of Israel, theirs is the adoption to sonship. So now Christians, churches, are now adopted as God's sons. Israel was God's adopted son. Now all these blessings of sonship have been transferred from Israel to Christians. Secondly, the Roman world knew about adoption. Here is an adopted son. Often they would be an older, a child, maybe in their late teens or 20s even, deliberately chosen to carry on the father's name, deliberately chosen to be an heir, to inherit the father's estate. They would not be inferior to natural sons. An adopted son may well even enjoy more of his father's love than a natural son. Adoption, therefore, was known to the Roman hearers and to the Jewish hearers. And the benefit of adoption, one of the great joys of adoption, is intimacy. Doug Moo writes, Paul's words here form one of the most beautiful pictures of the believer's joy and the believer's security. We are sons, not slaves. Now, just two interesting points here. We are slaves. Paul calls himself a slave in Romans 1:1. We serve, Romans 7:6, in the new way of the Spirit. And something about fear. Should I fear God? Well, kind of yes and kind of no. Godly David says, my flesh trembles for fear of you. The fear of God is a good thing. But that's a filial fear, a good fear, a family fear. I love my father, I love my mum, I respect them, I'm in awe of them. This in verse 15 is servile fear, a cowering fear. Feelings of cowering fear before God are not signs of godliness. Feelings of servile fear are signs of unbelief. We now are people of freedom, not fear. I read a sad story of how different God is to human parents. And I think the story is true. It was in 1995. Here's Richard, a 4-year-old boy in Illinois. He's adopted, but he's naughty, disturbed. He's 4 years of age, he's not doing as he's told. And his adopted parents went back to court to pass him back to his biological father. And they did. Hear these haunting words of this 4-year-old Richard, crying out to his parents, I'll be good. Don't make me leave. I'll be good. That's sad, isn't it? That's not how God works. That's really slavery, isn't it? But let me just contrast being a slave or being a child. A slave lives in insecurity. If I slip up, my master might beat me or get rid of me, like the story. But a child lives in security. If I slip up, my father will forgive me. A slave obeys under compulsion because I have to, whereas children obey out of love and joy in dad or mum. A slave works under threat of pain or loss, punishment, payback. A child, discipline is not retribution but loving instruction. A slave concentrates on outward behaviour and complying with rules, whereas a child, a concentration is on relationship and attitudes. A slave gets work but no honour. A child works but feels honoured. You are no longer a slave so that you live in fear again. And then there's great intimacy in being an adopted son of God. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. End of 15. Like Jesus spoke to his father, Abba. This is Aramaic. Jesus spoke it in the garden. Abba, Father. Everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. How the Son speaks to the Father, Abba. Or Paul's words in Galatians. Because you are his sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts. The Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. Do we relate to God as Abba, Father? Today, have you just talked to him? Father. It's a bit like in Little House on the Prairie, isn't it? Pa, sir. It's a homely family word. Father, Dad. So whatever you've done, however I feel, however small the worry is this week, I can go to him. Father. Martin Lloyd-Jones writes, Abba is a word lisped by a little child. But let's notice the word cry. We cry, Abba, Father. It's a strong word. Clearly the apostle has used it deliberately. It means a loud cry, an expression of deep emotion. It implies a real knowledge of God. God is no longer a distant God. Our praying is the spontaneity of the child who sees the Father. Spontaneity, confidence, intimacy. We can approach God without fear. We can always be assured of his fatherly care and concern. What a privilege it is to be a Christian, a child of God. I reckon, do you reckon, that non-Christians must feel very alone? Just on my own. It's all down to me. Non-Christians are orphans. Orphans of their own choosing. But that's so sad, isn't it? A Christian is not an orphan. A Christian is an adopted son of God. Our sonship to God, then, is the summit of creation and the goal of redemption. And may these verses inspire you to delight in God as your Father more this week. Ed grew up in a happy Christian home. Ed's a Christian now. And yet Ed struggles with the idea of God as his Father. He keeps coming back to this thought. God the Father doesn't really love me. Jesus has brought me into his family, but the Father only accepts me because he has to. God sees me as a disruptive nuisance child or an unwanted stepchild that he has to endure. Ed, you and I need to know that God really loves us, that God adopted you because he wanted you. He took you. You were a rebellious, sinful orphan like me, but God chose you. You are the delight of his eye, the delight of his heart. You are wanted. You're a child of God. You get to go to Disney's Magic Kingdom, not because you're good, but because you're his child. Well, all the information for today is on the email. Tonight's Zoom is at 8 p.m. It's a catch-up. And then anyone who wants to complete that sentence in 19 words or so, since I'm an adopted child of God, then enjoy your VE lunch and God bless you.